Welcome everyone to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom, the show that dares to ask, how is your body's real estate impacting the neighborhood that is your brain? I'm Ethan Foster, your resident champion of carefully timed deadpan observations. Some say I'm so calm, I once taught a yoga class in my sleep. No one noticed.
And I'm Alara Sky, a woman who believes that if your brain could charge rent, it would evict certain types of fat quicker than a landlord with a waiting list. Get your pens ready, because we're about to give you some new insights into what's going on inside your head. And by head, I mean that 3-pound lump that's orchestrating every witty thought, every questionable diet choice, and every vow that you'll do better tomorrow.
Today's topic comes from Dr. Mercola's recent analysis pointing out how hidden fat threatens your brain's future health. Hidden fat. Great, another boogeyman to keep us up at night, as if we needed more. But apparently this boogeyman is real. We're talking about visceral fat, the sneaky stuff that doesn't politely stay visible in your midsection, but instead parks itself deep around your organs.
It's like that party guest who shows up uninvited and then hogs the best seat in your living room. Except this time, it's your liver and intestines that are hosting the party. Visceral fat might as well be wearing a shirt that reads, I came, I saw, I inflamed.
Good slogan. I'm sure someone out there is printing that on gym gear as we speak. But let's break this down. We've got two primary types of fat. Subcutaneous, which is the stuff that lurks just under the skin, and visceral, which cozies up to your internal organs. The research suggests that both can harm your brain volume if you accumulate too much. And we're not talking about just any part of the brain. Oh no. We're talking about the hippocampus, the frontal cortex. Basically the crucial real estate that keeps you from confusing your best friend's name with your cat's.
Guilty confession. I have once greeted my cat using my cousin's name. In my defense, they both respond to treat bags, so maybe it wasn't entirely my fault. But let's keep the conversation focused. If our hippocampus starts shrinking, we might soon be calling the mailman Fluffy too.
That might be a little awkward, although it could also yield interesting holiday card stories. The point is that higher levels of visceral fat are linked to reduced brain volume. Something about this hidden fat encourages inflammation, disrupts blood flow, and basically fosters an environment that your neurons despise.
And apparently, it hits women particularly hard. One study involving over 10,000 adults found that in women, increased visceral fat was associated with greater brain volume loss compared to men. Just the kind of equality we never asked for.
If we needed something else to worry about, the data also indicates that people as young as 20 to 39 with increased visceral fat had nearly 6 times the odds of lower gray matter volume in their brains compared to those who don't have that extra load around their organs. If you're in your 30s thinking your biggest problem is picking the right streaming service, guess again.
Yes, because nothing screams, I'm young and free like quietly losing gray matter. I'm kidding, of course, but only partially. That's a rather stunning number, 6 times. Suddenly, the freshman 15 from college dorm life has taken on a new dimension of seriousness.
The question many of us have is, why is this happening? There's a link to inflammation. Visceral fat is not just stored energy. It's like a mini factory churning out inflammatory substances 24/7. That can damage brain cells and disrupt normal brain function, eventually leading to conditions like Alzheimer's disease.
Alzheimer's, the dreaded A word that many people fear more than turning 40. It's a progressive neurological condition that messes with memory, thinking, and behavior. And guess what? Visceral fat might be fueling it, thanks to the chronic inflammatory environment it creates.
There's also the matter of insulin resistance, which can come along for the ride with visceral fat. Insulin resistance is your body's way of telling you, I'm trying to process sugar, but I'm getting kind of cranky and inefficient doing so. That inefficiency starves your brain of glucose and sets you up for accelerated cognitive decline. So the next time someone says, hey, I just have a bit of extra padding, you might suggest that extra padding isn't exactly innocent.
Let's not forget the discussion about BMI, or body mass index. Typically, we see that an extremely high BMI can lead to all sorts of metabolic issues, which in turn might feed into Alzheimer's. But there's an interesting twist in some studies. In certain metabolically healthy people, higher BMI may be linked to a lower amyloid positivity risk. Then again, it also correlates to a higher risk of vascular issues in the brain. It's like saying, we reduced your chance of getting hammered by storm A, but watch out for storm B.
Right. In one study of Asian participants, underweight status was associated with a higher risk of amyloid beta positivity. But if they were obese and metabolically healthy, that risk was lower. Now, let's just emphasize metabolically healthy. This group is basically the unicorn of obesity. It's not as common as we'd like. Still, it's evidence that weight alone doesn't tell the whole story. We also have to consider metabolic markers, insulin sensitivity, and other details.
In short, you can't just rely on your bathroom scale to tell you how healthy you are. Just like you can't judge a house solely by its exterior paint job. There's a difference between a fresh coat of paint and a sound foundation. Metabolic health is your foundation.
Another major piece of research, yes, more reading for the curious, points out that the presence of visceral fat may account for over 75% of the effect of a high BMI on the buildup of amyloid proteins in the brain. If you want to blame something for that brain plaque, visceral fat is definitely a prime suspect.
It's the ringleader in a gang of troublemakers. Insulin resistance, low HDL, and systemic inflammation are co-conspirators. And let's not forget about reduced blood flow to the brain. Visceral fat also helps block healthy circulation. As if the inflammation alone weren't enough, your brain also has to cope with less oxygen and fewer nutrients. That's like running a marathon without water or energy gels.
So maybe we should all rethink the phrase, "I'm packing on the pounds," because that might mean I'm packing on more amyloid proteins. And if that doesn't catch your attention, I don't know what will.
If that's not enough to scare us, apparently this can start decades before any symptoms show up. It's like paying the mortgage on a house you haven't even moved into yet, but the debt is already accruing interest. The interest in this metaphor is all the neurological damage accumulating behind the scenes.
Now, let's talk about how we can help our brains not stage a rebellion over too much hidden fat, because we'd like to keep as many marbles as we can for as long as we can. Dr. Mercola highlights a few practical tips.
Indeed. And you know me. I like taking the conversation out of the abstract and into the real world. Let's start with building muscle mass through regular strength training. My personal fitness routine mostly consists of lifting groceries from the trunk to the kitchen, but apparently, that's not enough. Resistance training is where it's at, whether you're pumping iron or using your own body weight. Muscles don't just look good in pictures, they also help regulate insulin and keep metabolic health in check.
My problem with heavy lifting is that I tend to think if I grunt loud enough, it counts as an extra rep. Possibly not scientifically accurate, but there's definitely a correlation between muscle mass and better insulin sensitivity. In other words, more muscle mass means you can handle dietary carbohydrates better without spiking your blood sugar all over the place. The payoff is less visceral fat accumulation, better energy, and apparently more brain volume as you age.
Next up is the waist-to-hip ratio. We're not just trying to see if you've got an hourglass figure for the next runway. We're talking about an actual measurement that divides your waist measurement by your hip measurement. This ratio is a better predictor for some conditions than BMI alone. For instance, if your ratio is above certain thresholds, you're considered at higher risk for metabolic dysfunction, and possibly at higher risk for brain issues down the line.
The guidelines say, for men, a ratio under 0.95 is considered low risk, 0.96 to 0.99 is moderate, and above 1.0 is high risk. For women, under 0.80 is low risk, 0.81 to 0.84 is moderate, and over 0.85 is high risk. So if you want to gauge your risk, you might want to ditch the scale and bust out a tape measure.
It's like measuring your personal equator. And if your ratio starts creeping up, you might want to think about adding more salad and fewer donuts to your life plan. Because if your equator expands too much, your brain just might shrink in response.
That's the cruel irony. We chase bigger everything. Bigger houses, bigger paychecks, except bigger waistlines. That's the one bigger that actually shrinks your gray matter. I guess nature loves irony.
Let's also discuss a big elephant in the room. Seed oils, sometimes innocently called vegetable oils. They might sound healthy because vegetables are good, right? But these processed seed oils, corn oil, soybean oil, canola oil, and so forth, are high in linoleic acid, which can drive obesity and accumulate in your tissues, fueling inflammation. It's like a Trojan horse in your dietary plan.
Precisely. You think you're making a healthy choice because the label says contains vegetable oil, but if you look at the actual impact on your waistline and metabolic markers, it's a different story. Dr. Mercola suggests that focusing on eating saturated fats from grass-fed animal sources while eliminating processed seed oils is a pretty big key in controlling visceral fat. So, tallow, grass-fed butter, and ghee might be better for you than you realize, provided you're using them wisely.
I love the idea that butter can be part of a healthy plan. True, you shouldn't eat a pound of it a day while bathing in it, but using high-quality sources of saturated fat instead of those sneaky seed oils is a major step in the right direction. Linoleic acid is the real culprit behind the scenes. It's basically the ultimate backstage villain that's often overshadowed by sugar, but it has a starring role in your waist expansion.
And then there's protein intake. Dr. Mercola emphasizes about 0.8 grams of protein per pound of ideal body weight daily, with about a third of that coming from collagen. This collagen portion is interesting, because most people just think of collagen as something that helps their skin look younger. It also supports joints, muscle maintenance, and overall metabolic health.
Right. If you're aiming for better metabolic health, you need protein, but you also need the right building blocks to maintain muscle. Collagen provides amino acids that you won't get as abundantly from typical muscle meats. And while it's not the only key, it's an important piece of the puzzle. Eat enough protein, get stronger, keep your waistline in check, and your brain will probably send you a silent thank you note.
Speaking of notes, let's highlight the main takeaways for folks who have drifted off trying to guess how much they can bench press. 1. Visceral fat is a potent threat to your brain. 2. Keep an eye on your waist-to-hip ratio. 3. Lift some weights or do some resistance training. 4. Switch out that industrial seed oil for healthier, stable fats like butter, ghee, or coconut oil. And 5. Make sure your protein is adequate, including collagen.
Also, remember that while the scale might give you a number, it doesn't always distinguish between muscle and fat, nor does it track how many inflammatory markers you have running around in your bloodstream. Visceral fat is the metabolic troublemaker. Controlling it is key to helping you sidestep or at least slow down things like cognitive decline and Alzheimer's risk.
Let's circle back to Alzheimer's for just a moment. We've discussed how the disease is characterized by a progressive loss of memory, thinking, behavior, changes in mood, and all sorts of difficulties that affect daily life. We know that the hippocampus shrinks significantly, we know that the frontal cortex is impacted, and we know that visceral fat can expedite that process years before symptoms arise.
Exactly. You might be 45 years old feeling perfectly fine, but if you've been building up visceral fat since your 20s, changes may already be taking root in your brain. That's not exactly the best news, but it is a wake-up call to tackle your midsection before your midsection tackles you.
It's a real call to take proactive steps, and it's encouraging in one sense. It means we aren't powerless. If building muscle, adjusting your ratio of fats in the diet, and upping protein can all help, that's far more appealing than just throwing up our hands and saying, Alzheimer's runs in my family, so I guess it's inevitable.
Genes can predispose you, but lifestyle can shape how they manifest. Visceral fat might be an environmental contributor that's well within our power to reduce. We have more control over this than many people think.
Let's talk about some of the practical day-to-day changes. We've mentioned seed oils. They're ubiquitous in processed foods. If you grab a random bag of chips, it's probably fried in canola or soybean oil. If you go to a restaurant, they're likely using one of these oils because they're cheap and stable for commercial frying. So, one tip is to reduce meals out, or at least ask the restaurant what they cook with.
Don't be afraid to request butter or olive oil if they have it. True, some places may look at you as though you've asked them to recite Shakespeare in the original Klingon, but it never hurts to ask. Another approach is to cook more at home. At least then you know what's going on in your skillet.
Another point is portion control. Even if you're choosing healthy foods, too many calories can still lead to fat accumulation. You can't outrun the laws of thermodynamics, though I do suspect certain individuals have tried. If you eat an entire day's worth of calories at midnight while binging a show, your body might not handle that well. Spreading out your intake can help your metabolism, and making thoughtful choices about macros, protein, fat, carbs goes a long way.
One of the best ways to ensure adequate protein, by the way, is to plan it into your meals. If you're a breakfast person, maybe start the day with some eggs from free-range hens or something like that. If you're more of a lunch and dinner person, make sure to incorporate lean meats or fish or plant-based proteins if you prefer, supplemented with collagen sources. It's less about dogma and more about making sure you get enough amino acids to maintain muscle mass.
And let's not discount the role of daily movement, beyond formal exercise, just staying active throughout the day. A short walk every hour or two can help keep your metabolism in a better state. It's not always about doing a triathlon. Small activities add up to big results over time.
I imagine some folks are listening, thinking, that sounds great, but is this all or nothing? The short answer is no. Even modest changes can make a meaningful difference. If you can't do 5 days of intense strength training a week, start with 2. If you can't eliminate all seed oils immediately, reduce them as much as possible. Small victories accumulate.
Right? We don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And maybe in a year, you'll see your waist-to-hip ratio come down. You'll notice your energy improve, and you'll possibly see other benefits too, like better mood regulation. Reducing inflammation can have a ripple effect on everything from joint comfort to mental clarity.
We don't always think about mental clarity until we lose it. Then, ironically, we can't think about it well anyway. It's like losing your keys when you're already late. So prevention is key. Keep your brain from shrinking, keep your midsection from expanding. It's practically poetic.
Let's talk about something that might be on people's minds. If someone's already carrying a lot of visceral fat, is it too late? The data suggests it's never too late to start. The earlier you address it, the better. But even in older adults, improving metabolic markers has shown benefits for cognitive function.
Right? Our bodies are surprisingly resilient if you give them half a chance. That doesn't mean you can wave a magic wand and say, I'll drop 50 pounds and all will be well. You'll need consistent changes. But yes, the body can adapt and repair to a certain extent. The hippocampus can generate new neurons, especially if inflammation is lowered and the environment becomes more supportive.
That's a hopeful message. After all, a big part of Dr. Mercola's emphasis is about understanding the deeper influences behind chronic disease, not just slapping a Band-Aid on the symptoms. Visceral fat is a major risk factor for a disease that robs people of their memories and independence. So, if we can mitigate that risk with some lifestyle modifications, it's a big win.
Absolutely. Let's not forget that while these are serious topics, it's not about living in fear. It's about living in awareness. If I know that a certain type of fat can shrink my brain, that knowledge can motivate me to skip the third slice of pizza or at least offset it with a nice salad, some strength training, and high-quality protein sources. It's about balance and consistency.
Well said. The last thing we want is for folks to become neurotic about every morsel. But understanding the impact of how we eat and how we move is a big part of living well. And living well, ironically, might also mean living with a bit less around your midsection.
That's the new definition of a strong core, I suppose. Less of the hidden fat, more of the actual muscle, and definitely more mindful choices about what we put in our bodies.
So, let's do a quick recap in plain language. Visceral fat is deeply destructive. It raises inflammation, encourages insulin resistance, and reduces blood flow to the brain. That trifecta spells trouble for your noggin.
Exactly. Subcutaneous fat also contributes, but the real troublemaker in the long run is that hidden visceral stuff. Women can be more vulnerable to it in terms of brain volume loss. Younger adults can be impacted before they even realize it, and it's all playing into cognitive decline, including Alzheimer's disease.
That means if you're hearing this in your 20s or 30s, you can take steps now to reduce your risk decades later. No time like the present to safeguard your future self from rummaging through your kitchen, having forgotten what you came for.
Or calling your goldfish Grandpa George. Let's hold off on that for as long as possible. And the main strategies recommended by Dr. Mercola are: develop strength with resistance training, keep an eye on your waist-to-hip ratio, ditch seed oils in favor of healthier fats, and ensure adequate protein with some emphasis on collagen. Not rocket science, but it might keep your rocket from malfunctioning.
That's as good a reason as any to start lifting more than just the TV remote. By the way, I've always suspected that my carefully curated extended couch lounging regimen was probably not a good use of my time. Now it's official. The data suggests I should replace it with something a little more active.
I'm sure your couch will understand. Maybe it'll give you a standing ovation if it had arms. But it doesn't, so you'll just have to imagine the couch cheering you on as you do squats.
That's a mental image, but hey, if it helps to stay motivated, I'll take it. Summing up, it's never too late to make changes. We can all benefit from an extra push to stay active, adjust our diets, and remain mindful of that hidden fat, which threatens our future brain health.
Right. And let's be frank. Our society has normalized certain unhealthy habits, from extended sedentary work to the overconsumption of heavily processed foods. This conversation is about stepping back and asking, is this actually good for my brain? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to pivot.
Dr. Mercola's analysis truly emphasizes the importance of controlling what might seem uncontrollable, our internal fat distribution. But with the right strategies, it's far from uncontrollable. It's well within our reach to shift that balance.
Definitely. And it's good to keep a sense of humor about it, too. Health advice doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. You can laugh, but then go do your squats, eat a reasonable amount of carbs, get enough protein, skip the seed oils, and retake your waist-to-hip measurement in a few months. That's how progress is made. One step at a time.
So, to everyone who's been listening, if you take one thing away today, let it be that your waistline can be your brain's best friend or worst enemy. And if you can't remember that line next week, it might be time to start measuring your waist.
You might also want to measure how much humor you can handle. If you've stuck with us this long, we applaud your resilience. In all seriousness, we do appreciate everyone tuning in to Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. We hope you found this conversation enlightening, and maybe a little entertaining too.
We'll keep the comedic banter going as we dive into more health topics in future episodes. But for now, we'll leave you with a final image. You living life with a strong body composition, a sharp mind, and absolutely no confusion about who's a cat and who's a cousin.
And if that isn't the perfect motivation for all of us, I don't know what is. Stay well, everyone, and remember, your brain called, it wants less visceral fat. So get moving, eat well, and we'll see you next time for another dose of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom.
Take care, folks, and don't forget to measure your waist-to-hip ratio. And if you find yourself ever mixing up your car keys with a banana, well, that might be your gentle reminder to step away from the processed oils. See you next time.
Bye for now. Stay smart, stay healthy, and keep that hidden fat at bay. Your neurons will thank you later.